Let's recap really fast. So what we have discussed so far in episode 1 was Proverbs. It starts out on wisdom by telling us that God, He's just, He's fair. He's ordered the world in the way that brings blessings on the righteous and punishment on the wicked. That's what Proverbs has to tell us. But then last Wednesday, as Brother Clark taught, he brought out Ecclesiastes, comes along and says, hold on. I know that you would like to think that that's the truth all the time, that the wicked are always going to be punished and those that are righteous are always going to be blessed. But I've been walking to and fro throughout the earth, and I've seen some things here on this fallen planet. That's important that you pick up on that Brother Clark brought out, is we live on a fallen planet, and the author of Ecclesiastes says, here under the sun. That means we're living in a broken world, and we're going to have to understand that broken things happen in broken worlds, right? We live in a world of circus mirrors where things aren't as they appear to be. And Ecclesiastes is going to come along and remind us of that, and he's just going to say, hey, look, yeah, if you do the Proverbs thing, you're increasing your chances of living a blessed life, but just know life and chance happens to us all. And so he tells us this by bringing out things that are hevel, which is his word. It translates to vanity, but it's vapor. What good is smoke? It's not fire that warms us up and cooks our food and replenishes the nutrients into the soil after you burn them. So what good is the smoke? It's just a byproduct. But here's what's true about smoke. You can see it, you can smell it, you can feel it, but you'll never be able to hold it. And that's what the author of Ecclesiastes is trying to tell us. He said, all of life is smoke. And we're like, well, then what's the point? Well, there's a lot of point. It's a byproduct of something that is important. But just remember, you'll never be able to hold this thing. So this leaves us with the question that we're going to really explore tonight. If that's the case, and if the cynic, Ecclesiastes, if he's right, then is God wise? Is God just? Which is why the Hebrew Bible places the volume. Remember, we're exploring 3 particular books. We're looking at Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. So Job is placed 3rd in the volume of the Hebrew literature. In their Bible, they have 3 books of wisdom. Job is last, because Job is going to answer the question that we now have after we've listened to the cynic. Is God really wise then? If it rains on the just and the unjust, is God really wise? Is He just? Can we trust Him? How do we reconcile this now? If we live in a world where even those who live for God, they perish, and those that have done everything that they should, they've raised up the child in the way they should go, and the child walks away from God, is God fair? Can we trust Him? This is the question that we need to dive into tonight, and Job is the perfect man to tell us that. So as many of you know, the book of Job starts us out showing us that he is the righteous man from the land of Uz. So we're going to talk about the man from the land of Uz tonight, all right? He had 10 kids, 7 sons and 3 daughters. It shows us that he has 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 oxen, 500 donkeys. He has a large household. He's got all the riches in the world. The Bible even says that he is one of the greatest people in the East at this time. It goes on to tell us that he was such a good man that he would go, and during the time of sacrifice, he would offer his sacrifice, but then he would go overboard. He would offer even more sacrifice on behalf of his kids. And he said, this is just in case my kids sin, I've made sacrifice for them. Bottom line, Job's a good dude. Job is an outstanding individual. But then, all of a sudden, in chapter 1, the camera angle begins to pan up as it focuses no longer on Job. It goes up to the heavenly realm, and we now see something strange. We see this throne room, which, by the way, is a little Easter egg of another lesson we're going to explore later this year. We're going to look at the throne room of God. And we see this throne room where the eternal God is sitting on His throne, and all the host of heaven, they all come around. And God, like a really joy-filled daddy, it's like He pulls out His phone and He's like, hey, have you seen my kid? Have you seen Job? Like, let me show you. Everybody, he flips through his little iPhone and he's like, look at this touchdown he just scored. This guy is amazing. He's like I don't want to call him proud because God has no pride, but he is the joy-filled father talking about his child. But then in the same room, a being approaches the throne. And this is not his name, but the Bible says Satan in English, but in Hebrew, it's the Satan. It starts with the article the. So Satan's not a name, it's a title, and it means the opposer or the gossiper. And as this joy-filled father is showing all of the host of heaven how great his child is and how he's blameless in all his ways, and he is a servant who fears me and shuns evil, this being, this gossiper, walks up to the father and says, yeah, but he's good for a reason. The only reason he is good is you've always put a wall of protection around him. I'm telling you, if you take that little wall away and let him experience Ecclesiastes, he won't love you anymore. Look how rich he is. Look how blessed he is. He will curse you to your face. And this is what the Father says. Test him. Now remember, we're just coming off the heels of a series of lessons on the tree test. And you and I really want to know, how do we pass these tree tests? And so far in this series, we've talked about the woman, Proverbs, who takes her lover by the hand and brings her to a garden. And she says, my fruit is better than gold and silver. Wisdom teaches us how to get back to the garden. And to do that, wisdom is teaching us how to pass our tree test. She tells us, when you're around a strange woman, men, how can you hold hot coals and not be burned? So it is with a man who looks at a woman. That's wisdom. How do you pass the woman test when you're married? Don't go near the hot coals. She's telling us how to pass our tree test. And here God allows the gossiper to test righteous Job. All Job has up to this point is a worldview of Proverbs. All he's been given was blessings. He's been righteous and he has reaped the benefits of that righteousness. He is now, however, like many of us in this room, he is going to be given the full dose of Ecclesiastes. Let's just pause for a second and let's be extremely thankful that the Bible is honest with us. That the Bible didn't just kind of it's just this big book of blessings, and what you and I, when we go through our problems, we don't have a book that we can't go through and be like, well, man, nothing relates to me. I'm thankful the Bible was just honest with me. That alone, I can deal with the problems knowing that God didn't hoodwink me and just do all this because I'm a terrible person. As we're going to find out, Job has lived Proverbs, and now he's about to live Ecclesiastes. And in a single day, everything he has is taken or destroyed, and grief overwhelms him. And he says words that will later doubt. He will later doubt in this book. Job arose and tore his robe, shaved his head, fell on the ground in worship, and he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. Job's doing pretty good, considering, right? That all 5,000 oxen, all 3,000 donkeys, all 500 this animal, all 10 children have all been taken from him in a single afternoon. This is a pretty noble. We're starting to see, this guy's pretty righteous. And yet again, if you read, the camera pans upwards and we see another scene taking place in the throne room yet again. And a proud father, again, pulls out his iPhone of a suffering servant living through Ecclesiastes, and he's like, look at him. He's still faithful. This is my child. Look at this guy. He's like the MVP now. And he's bragging all through heaven about how great his son is. And he says he holds fast his integrity. And then the gossiper comes back and he says, skin for skin. All that a man has, he will give up for his life. He'll curse you. Hit him in his bones. Hit him in his flesh, and he'll curse you to his face. And God says, test him. And then in another afternoon, he's stricken with sickness in his body. To add insult to losing everything, he now loses his health. Could you imagine? Could you imagine this? To which his wife looks at him and says, are you still living a life of integrity? Why don't you just curse God? To which he nobly replies, shall we not accept good from God and not trouble? And it sounds like Job is nailing it, right? It sounds like, okay, man, I cannot measure up to this Job fella. None of us can compare. But there's more going on the inside that you and I aren't seeing in the life of Job. A lot of people, they quote these passages to me like, Job never questioned God. And I look at them, I'm like, have you read past like chapter 4? All right, let's read past chapter 4. Even though he looks like he's holding fast, he sits and he grieves for 7 days and 7 nights, and he says not a single word. He's got 3 friends that come and sit with him in his grieving, and they don't say a word either, because it was customary in the ancient Near East to not speak until the mourner spoke. That's some good advice for me and you in our modern context. I'm not going to say a word until the one grieving speaks. Because most of the time, we get ourselves in trouble when we start trying to fix everything with our words. We just need to sit in silence until that one who is grieving begins to speak. And so they do. They sit with him in silence. And finally, after 7 days of silence, Job begins to speak up. And he says, I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest, only turmoil. And he writes a long poem where he regrets the day he was even born. And we're starting to see the crack emerging in the vessel called Job. And we're looking at him and like, oh, okay, there's a crack in the vessel. It's not pristine. It's not perfect. Maybe I do relate to Job. Maybe I am starting to see the crack in the vessel. And Job, he writes this long poem. He says, I wish that I were just stillborn. I wish that the day I was born, God would have wiped me off the planet. Why am I even alive? And we start seeing the crack spread through this vessel. And this triggers one of his friends. In Job 4, one of his friends named Eliphaz replies with a rebuke and tells Job that only evil people get this kind of treatment. And this is what his friend has to say. I've seen those who plow iniquity and sow trouble, they reap the same. Job, we're trying to answer the question, is God fair? Is God wise? And Job, this is what we've come to the conclusion of. If all this is happening to you, bro, it's probably because you've done something. This doesn't happen unless you've got some flaws. Sin and death and all these things don't happen to suffering servants like you. If you were truly righteous, this wouldn't be happening. You must have some iniquity. You must have sowed some trouble because you're reaping trouble. And in our worldview, you get what you deserve. God is fair, and you're getting what you deserve. This is where a back and forth argument between Job and his 3 friends goes on for 27 chapters, back and forth, where they're wrestling with the question you and I are longing to hear. Is God wise and is God just? Job stands firm in his arguments. He looks at Eliphaz and he says, I don't know why this is happening. I didn't do anything wrong. I am innocent. I've been perfectly pure. I've made a covenant with my eyes not to look at women. I don't know why any of this is happening. And many of the words used in those 27 chapters are also used in legal terms. It was a court procession where he's being brought to court by his 3 friends, and they're stacking the evidence, and they're like, look at all this. Look, the evidence is here. Problems, you lost your children. And one of his friends says, your children died probably because they had some hidden sin. That's why you lost your children. You've done something wrong. The system just doesn't break down like this unless it's your fault. They're trying to understand God's wisdom. His friends get enraged as they argue with him that there's no way, Job, you can be just and blameless. If you are pure, then why did this happen? Job is just as confused as they are by the circumstances. And the friends come across fearful as they are trying to reconcile. If Job truly is just, and this has happened, then what do we make of this God that we're living for? And you understand the wrestling match, right? The 3 friends are like, Job, if you are really pure, if you're really righteous, if you're really just, then this God we're living for is not fair. So they're trying, Brother Clark, to make God out to be fair, because that's what happens. You do bad, you get bad. So there's no way, if you're pure, this has happened, because if that's the case, if that's truly the case, there's no hope for us. And now our whole theology breaks down of why live for God at all? Why live for a God if bad things happen to good people? That's what they're wrestling with. And it's ironic that that is still what you and I wrestle with, even though we have three better friends: Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job. We're still wrestling with this in 2024. Why do bad things happen to godly people? Who told you that living for God was an insurance policy? Who has bewitched us? Is it our culture that maybe we're raised in the modern West and we treat everything with purchasing power? If I fast enough or if I pray enough, I can buy God off. Or if I suffer enough, then I could pay off future suffering with past suffering. I've suffered enough, that means I don't have to suffer anymore. I don't know what it is that has trickled into. Maybe it's the prosperity theology that we hear preached across denominational lines that says, you know what, if you give and give and give, God will return it back onto you. I don't know where it's come from, but it did not come for our three better friends that tell us honestly what's going on in our world. So the question is too much for them to deal with, so they merely conclude, Job, you must be hiding some secret sin. Job chapter 6, Job wishes for death from the hand of God, and then he rebukes his friends by saying this. Job's had it with his friends. He who withholds kindness from a friend forsakes the fear of the Almighty. My brothers are treacherous as a torrent bed, and as torrential streams that pass away, which are dark with ice and where the snow hides itself. When they melt, they disappear. When it is hot, they vanish from their place. The beauty in the poetry of Job is Job's like, you're like ice. The second things get hot, y'all disappear. You are worthless friends. As the words of Eliphaz play through Job's mind, Job then says this. If the slide will jump. If I sin, what do I do to you, you watcher of mankind? Why have you made me your mark? Why have I become a burden to you? This is him talking to God now. This is the guy who we always say he was faithful and he never questioned God. Well, what is this? The crack is spreading in the vessel. He says to God himself, if I sin, what did I do to you? What did I do to you, God? You're the watcher of mankind. Why have you made me your mark? Why have I become a burden to you? Why do you not pardon my transgression, take away my iniquity? For now I'm lying here in the earth. It seems like you're seeking me to just devour me, God. The statement makes the second friend, Bildad, angry. When Job says this to God, his friend speaks up. How long will you say these things and the words of your mouth be a great wind? Does God pervert justice, or does the Almighty pervert the right? If your children have sinned against him, he has delivered them into the hand of their transgressions. Job, your kids are gone because they were obviously doing something wrong. And remember, Job was offering extra sacrifices on behalf of his kids. Job is trying to figure out this system that he's now a part of, and his friends are trying to make sense of God as well. If you will seek God and plead with the Almighty for mercy, if you are pure and upright, surely then he will rouse himself for you and restore your rightful habitation. This is what his friends have to say to the suffering Job. Job answers his friends in chapter 9, verse 16, with one of his most dark moments. And he says, even if he were to summon God, even if God did show up, he wouldn't even give me a hearing in the courtroom. He would crush me with a storm, Job says, and multiply my wounds. I want you to remember the word storm. Job says, even if God did show up, he would just crush me with some mighty storm. The vessel of clay is no longer cracked. The pieces are lying in the floor now. Job has experienced the full dose of Ecclesiastes, and he has forgotten all of Proverbs because of this season. And now the vessel's not cracked. It is demolished on the floor. The crack has spread, and now he's going to make a powerful statement. Once the vessel completely lies on the ground, this is his final remark. I loathe my very life. Therefore, I will give free rein to my complaint. I'm going to just say what I think, is what Job says, and speak out in the bitterness of my soul. I say to God, do not declare me guilty, but tell me what charges you have against me. Now, pause. This is the guy who did not charge God foolishly just a few verses prior. And now he says to God, I didn't charge you. Why are you charging me guilty? This is going to make sense. You understand that Job now thinks he's more righteous than God. I've been good, you're the one that's evil. Does it please you to oppress me, to spurn the work of your hands while you smile on the plans of the wicked? While you persecute the really good people, you're smiling at all the people. It's like the guys on Shark Tank are excelling and making millions. God, you know what I could do with those millions? I'd give it to the church. I'd pay my tithes. I'd give it to mission. Why am I still sitting here broke? Why is Mr. Wonderful on the Shark Tank? He's obviously a scumbag. Why has he got all the money? Come now. Job's not so different than us now, is he? Do you have, here it is. Here it is. Remember, what caused us to fail our tree test? Our eyes. And listen to how he refers to God. Do you have eyes of flesh? Do you see as the mortals see? Are your days like those of a mortal? Or are your years like those of the strong man, that you must search out my faults and probe after my sin? Though you know that I am not guilty and that no one can rescue me from your hand, you know I'm the good guy, God. Why are you doing this to me? Did you hear it? Job has not charged God, but he feels like God has charged him. And he brings God's eyes into question. And then he confirms again, God, I'm not guilty, you are. Job is stating that he is more just and righteous than the God he's serving is. Here we're beginning to see the impurities in Job for the first time. That Job isn't so spotless, is he? They're boiling at the surface, and we must ask ourselves this question. Here, I want you to just think about this. Would we have ever known this pride was there had not trouble come? Would this have just been lurking as some malign disease hidden within? But now the disease has been exposed on the x-ray of his soul because he's under the radiation of God. And he's like, why is all this happening? And God is looking at him and saying, you see it now. You see what you could never have seen. I can't say that this is the reason why, because the Bible doesn't tell us. The Bible is strategically in the book of Job not giving us too much, because here's what I know we would do. If it did give us too much, we'd build an entire theology off of it. When there is no theology for pain, as we'll find out later, is sometimes it purifies and it shows us our problems. Sometimes it's just life. We don't know what's what. And whether this was caused by life, God, whatever the case may be, we do see that Job is getting a revelation of something he would have never seen. Did God cause all of this? No. The gossiper did. Did God stop it, though, is what we're wrestling with? No, he didn't stop it. So we now look at this God and we're trying to wrestle with, God, why am I living for you if you're not going to stop these things? I wanted an insurance policy. Could it be that God can turn this stuff around for good? We are looking for the good life, aren't we? And we'll never understand God's words in Matthew on the Sermon on the Mount when he says, blessed are the poor. Blessed are those who are reviled. The word blessed is not the typical Greek word for blessed. It's actually the translation of the good life is to those who are poor. What? That doesn't make sense. You will not understand that sermon without this. How is that the good life? Blessed. The good life are those who are reviled for your name's sake. Finally, Job has enough in chapter 13. But I would speak to the Almighty, and I desire to argue my case with God. As for you, you whitewash, he's talking to his friends, you whitewash with lies, worthless physicians are you all. Oh, that you would keep silent. That would be where your wisdom is. If you just shut your mouths, guys, that's going to be true wisdom. You were wise until you started talking. But he says, God, I want a meeting with you. And to these worthless friends, shut your mouths. Your silence would be your wisdom. At this, God still says nothing. Because if God speaks now, if God does answer the prayer of showing up and speaking with him, then God will be in the same category as his friends. He just said, your wisdom is in your silence. God still isn't going to speak for another 20 chapters. What did we expect from God? It's important to know that if God would respond, he is no better than his three friends. He'll speak when he's ready. He'll speak when he's ready. But his silence is going to further anger Job. Job wants a meeting with God, and this is what he has to say. Behold, I cry out, violence, but I'm not answered. I call for help. There is no justice. He has walled up my way so that I cannot pass, and he has set darkness upon my path. He has stripped me from my glory and taken the crown from my head. He breaks me down on every side, and I am gone, and my hope has he pulled up like a tree. He has kindled his wrath against me and counts me as his adversary. His troops come on together. They have cast up their siege ramp against me and encamp round about my tent. He has put my brothers far from me, and those who knew me are wholly estranged from me. My relatives have failed me. My close friends have forgotten me. The guests in my house and my maidservants count me as a stranger. I have become a foreigner in their eyes. God, I have got nobody. I'm isolated. You won't answer me. My family doesn't like me anymore. My friends are accusing me of doing things I haven't done. This is too much. Now the vessel is not just cracked pieces, but it's getting reduced to ashes now. It's no longer even the semblance of what Job used to be. It's just a pile of ash. And it's important at this point that we meditate on the sacrifice. The animal sacrifice was never supposed to just have its throat slit when dedicated to God. It was to be skinned, broken down, put on the altar, and sit on that altar all night till it was reduced to ashes. If I am to offer my body a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, for this is my reasonable service, what did I expect? The expectation of being a living sacrifice is to be reduced to ashes, with the intention and hope of when God breathes, I'll be moved. This is the process of pain. This is what we get. Is it truly pain in light of that, though? What is your desire? Was it riches? Was it notoriety? Or was it to be moved by God? That is the wrestling match that we have to contend with. What did you want from God? Blessings or Him? Job will then go on to talk about how he has defended the widows. I fed the poor. I took care of the orphans. I was strength to the weak. And we're seeing more and more the arrogance in Job we weren't originally privy to with the man who said, naked I came, naked I'll return. I will not charge God foolishly. Now we're starting to see that there was something else going on inside of Job that Job didn't even know about. Job has an arrogance that all his life I've lived proverbially. I've had blessings and I was a good person. And God's going to show him there's only one good, the Father. There's none righteous, not one. There's no one good. Your righteousness, Job, is as filthy rags. And we don't know that until we go through this. So again, what were we hoping for? A trophy for our righteousness? A pat on the back for, oh, you're the best out there? Or someone to look at us and say, what have you learned? He is above all. He is wise. He is righteous. He is just. What is man that he's even mindful of me? True humility never comes to those who have resumes. What were we hoping for? Job, you're becoming a little self-righteous. And in the midst of all this, look at this interesting little thing. Job says, oh, that my words would be written. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book. Oh, that with an iron pen and lead they were engraved in the rock forever. Hear this. They are. God answered his prayer and he didn't even know he was answering it. Here Job cries out, I want these words to be written forever in a book. And God is still silent. And in the silence of God, it never feels like he's answering prayers, does it? Meanwhile, here you and I are today, reading the words from that prayer meeting. God answered his prayer, but we're not moved because God seems silent, and yet God did it. And then he moves into prophecy. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth. He prophesies about the man Jesus. The Redeemer's going to walk on this planet, and after my skin has been thus destroyed, yet in my flesh I'll see God. And he gives us a glimpse that this is all going to end somewhere in heaven, even though at this point they have no theology of heaven. Job prophesies and says, even though this skin diminishes and I go back to dust, I believe that in my flesh I'll walk with God. Even in the midst of all this pain, he's still walking prophetically, and God's answering prayers. But it's hard to see when you're lying as ashes on the floor and nothing good has happened. I hope that this is encouraging us, that even though maybe whatever you're going through right now, it doesn't mean that God isn't listening. It doesn't mean that God isn't answering. It just feels like pain. Job now has questions, though, that he wants to understand. Why do the wicked live and reach old age and grow mighty in power? Their offspring, the wicked's children, are established in their presence and their descendants before their eyes. Let me just pause right now. Do you know how many times me and my wife asked this question? Why does the drug addict who is strung out on meth and has babies, and the baby's just running around, Brother Clark, in the living room, and they're just doing their own thing while mom and dad's just completely out of their mind on meth, and that baby's alive and well, but AJ and Amanda's child is not with us? These are the questions we're going to have. Why do the wicked live and reach old age and grow mighty in power? Their offspring are established in their presence and their descendants before their eyes. Why are their houses safe from fear? Why is there no rod of God upon those people? Those people deserve it, not us. Why do their bulls breed without fail? Their cow calves, and they do not have miscarriages. They send out their little boys like a flock, and their children dance. Why are the wicked happy and we're not? Did you know that our Bible would wrestle with these questions and not shy away from them? That it's in this book, and that God said, you know what, Job, I want to write these books forever because I want people in the future to know. I want them to know that living for me doesn't always come with everything you ever wanted. I wanted you to know that because I want them also to finish this book because it's going to end very well. And I want you to see this, but I want you to know that what you're going through, you weren't promised to not go through. And that doesn't make God mean. It doesn't make you a failure. It's just Ecclesiastes. He's now asking questions from Ecclesiastes that we just talked about last week. But we can't help but wonder, will he come and be turned into a cynic? Is Job going to, now that he's asking the cynical questions from Ecclesiastes, is Job going to become a bitter cynic? He is certainly on the verge of turning into a cynic, isn't he? But he can't fully do that because we read at the beginning that he was blessed. He's seen Proverbs. He has walked with Lady Wisdom, and now he's walking with the cynic. So he's in a wrestling match. What is God? Is he blessings all the time or problems all the time? What is he? He's Job, the wise man in the room who's seen both and knows he's God, even when it's good and when it's bad. So then he asks, he's got a lot of questions. Okay, God, you're not answering me. So then where does wisdom come? Where is the place of understanding? It seems like it's hidden from my eyes of all the living, and it's concealed from the birds of the air. Where is this wisdom? God still doesn't answer. And 2 chapters later, he finally gets mad and he says, why do I cry out to you and you don't answer? And this sets up the movie to introduce a character who has been sitting silently in the room while the 3 friends argue with Job, and these 4 wrestle back and forth. Is God just? Is he wise? Is this whole living for him thing fair? While they're going back and forth, there was another person in the room that we didn't even know was there. His name is Elihu, which is translated from Hebrew, my God is he. He speaks up and he apologizes for his age, but emphatically says, even though I'm the youngest one in the room, I've been listening and I've been silent this whole time. And I've got something I need to say now. Because I've been analyzing all 4 of you, and all of you are wrong. This is the power right here. This is where it's going to start hitting us with the right and the left. He rebukes the 3 friends and says, you don't know God. You have a theology of him, but you don't have a relationship. Because God is in more relationship with Job as a son mad at his daddy, but he's in relationship with the Father than he is with you 3 guys who have a theology of God but no relationship. God was still closer to Job as a petulant child. That's not fair, Dad. I wanted the Legos. Why? How come I don't have them? He's in more relationship with a child who has questions than with three men who claim to be wise but just have a theology, but no relationship with the Father. That's important. And Elihu looks at them and says, you have misrepresented God. And then he turns to Job and he goes, but you're not off the hook either. You have made yourself out to be more righteous than he. You think that because you took care of the widows, you think that because you fed the orphans, you think that because you were a good guy, that makes you more righteous than God? You didn't charge him, but you're saying he charged you? Job, you have spoken foolishly. In fact, here's his words. I tell you, in this you're not right, for God is greater than any mortal. Why do you complain to him that he responds to no one's words? For God does speak in one way, now another, though no one perceives it. And this is the one way. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on people as they slumber in their beds, he may speak in their ears and terrify them with warnings. He may come to you and say, don't do that, to turn them from wrongdoing and keep them from pride, to preserve them from the pit, their lives from perishing by the sword. Or, here's another way he may speak. He may speak to someone by making them be chastened on a bed of pain with constant distress in their bones. Could it be, Job, that God's been talking to you this whole time? Could it be that now you're lying on the floor as a pile of ashes? Is the answer. This is the good life, Job. You never would have expected this to be good. But you are going to be more humble than you've ever been because you're about to be set up to understand God better. What if this is one of the ways God is talking to you? I don't want to receive that because why would God let this happen to talk to me? He didn't. The gossiper did. The gossiper did all this. And God is going to use it to speak to you. God didn't do this. This has been my question. God, did I do some terrible sin that Levi had to pass away? What was in me that you couldn't just tell me through your word? Why did we, and Amanda and I, have to go through all this pain to see this? And God has yet to answer me. But what I sit with is, God, I don't know if you... I don't believe you caused my house to burn down. I don't believe you sent some plague on my wife and I. I don't believe that about God because his commandment is thou shalt not murder. And if he did cause this, then he has broken his own command. So God, I don't believe that you've done this, but I also am wrestling with the reality of you didn't stop it either. And this is the wrestling match. Is he wise? Is he fair? Is he just? I don't believe that God caused it, but what has been caused, he can now use and work through. And that is a beauty in itself because that means he won't waste the pile of ashes on the floor, just sweep them and throw them in the trash. Here's what I can now do with this pain. You are now decreased so I can increase. And now when I breathe, you're moved by my Spirit. That is enough for me. That's enough for me. He then says to Job, God does all these things to a person, twice, even 3 times, to turn them back from the pit, that the light of life may shine on them. Pay attention, Job, and listen to me. Be silent, and I will speak. If you have anything to say, answer me. Speak up, for I want to vindicate you. But if not, then listen to me. Be silent. I'll teach you some wisdom. Whoever this young man, Elihu, is, I'm glad he spoke up. Because he's got some other things. He then balances it out and shows in chapter 34 that God will bring on the wicked what they deserve. He says, look, it still is true that the wicked do get what they deserve. Don't think that the system is broken, that God isn't going to repay them. The wicked still get what they deserve. He then asks in verse 13, who appointed God over the earth? Who put him in charge of the whole world? He then goes on to say these wise things. He says, look, this system is still perfect. It still works. God is in charge somehow. Even though we don't understand the man who's in charge, we still know that he's working all this stuff out, and he has greater wisdom than we do. We just don't understand what's going on in your life. This sets up Job to understand when God is about to speak, because God's about to speak loud and clear. Elihu reasons that human beings cannot hear this if you don't hear anything else in this lesson. The point that this young man, the God is he, Elihu, what he's trying to tell us is, Job, whether you're righteous or sinful, that doesn't change God's nature. Do you hear that? You can't buy him off with your goodness. He's going to be good whether you are or not. And if you are evil and if you are wicked, he's still going to be good. And what Elihu is revealing to us is God is who he is. The God is he. In spite of us. Job, you didn't purchase favor from God because you were righteous. And you didn't redeem judgment from God because you were bad. He's God, we're not. For Job, wisdom was found in pain. Pain revealed to Job his own arrogance. But even greater than that, his pain will reveal God's majesty. Elihu ends his conversation by saying this. He brings the clouds to punish people or to water his earth and show his love. Do you hear? Let's stop for a minute and let's not just race past that. Elihu says, guys, when a storm cloud comes over, for some people it comes with winds that tear down a house and it's judgment. But for the farmer that's been praying for rain, it's the love of God. Both in the same storm, one guy gets destruction, one guy gets his prayer answered. What do we do with this God who, with the same storm, two different possibilities? Which is perfect setup because when God speaks, he speaks from a storm. A storm hovers over Job, and this is what God has to say. Notice that God never brings up the conversation between him and the gossiper. Job never knows about that. Job is forever ignorant of this conversation between God and the opposer. Why? Why? Let's ponder for a minute. The Bible begs us to meditate. I read the entire book of Job today, and I just sat all afternoon and just dwelled on these words. Why? Why did God not tell Job about the conversation had about him? Here's what I feel is the reason why. Because answers don't fix Job. Do you understand that if God would have come to Job and told him, hey, we had a contest in heaven to see if you would truly be the star football player, the MVP, that doesn't help Job. Now Job is going to feel like, was I just a spectacle on earth for sport in heaven? What? Answers don't fix things. So what does God choose to do instead? God shows him his glory. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Now, it's important that we not read this sarcastically. We have a tendency to do that. Where were you? No. Son, tone is everything. Did you know that 55% of our communication is nonverbal? 55% of our communication is our body language. 38% of it is tone. The rest is the actual words we use. I believe that God was looking at Job and he said, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, who marked off, Job, its dimensions? Surely you know. It's important to know the exclamation point's not in the original Hebrew. They don't have punctuation. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy. Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness. When I fixed limits for it and set its doors and bars in place. When I said, this is far, you have come and no further. Here is where your proud waves halt. Have you ever given orders, Job, to the morning or shown the dawn its place? He goes on in verse 22. Have you entered the storehouses of the snow or seen the storehouses of the hail, which I reserve? That word hail translates to meteors. Job, all those meteors I held back, you don't know why I did it. I held them in reserve for Sodom and Gomorrah. I held them in reserve. Where were you? Can you control all of these things that I'm doing? What is the way to the place where the lightning is dispersed, or the place where the east winds are scattered over the earth? Who cuts a channel for the torrents of rain and a path for the thunderstorm? To water a land where no one lives, an uninhabited desert. Listen to these words. This should blow your mind right here. Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Can you loosen Orion's belt? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons or lead out the bear with its cubs? Do you know the laws of the heavens? Can you set up God's dominion over the earth? Did you hear what God said? Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Job had to have had a conversation with God, y'all. And this should increase your faith in your Bible. Because scientists have only recently found out that the energies of motion of the individual stars of Pleiades, right here in the constellation Taurus, they cannot overcome the chains of gravity. This constellation will never spread apart. They are bound by the gravity. And God asked Job, he said, can you bind the chains of Pleiades? How could Job know that this was happening in space? Then God goes on to say, can you loosen Orion's belt? Did you know? We've only recently found this out due to the Hubble telescope that Orion's 3 stars that make his belt, they're spreading apart. And God looks at Job and says, can you loosen Orion's belt? How? How in the world, y'all? And if you're questioning this, we know that these are the words used because of the Dead Sea Scrolls. This predates any science we have. How could Job know this astronomical fact unless God spoke to him? He says, can you provide food for the ravens? He makes a funny statement. He says, look at the ostrich, Job. The ostrich, that I didn't give good sense nor wisdom to the ostrich. But when it spreads its wings and it runs, it laughs at the horse and its rider. Did Job know that the ostrich's brain is smaller than its eyeball and it's the dumbest animal on the planet? And God said, consider the ostrich. You would say, well, that's not fair for that bird to be so dumb. But watch it spread its wings and it can run 43 miles per hour and laugh at the horse. I've balanced this out, Job. I've weighed all this in the balance. That's not fair for that bird to be so dumb. Yeah, but it's fast. I balanced out its intellect with speed. I know what I'm doing, Job. I've worked all this out. I have sat and pondered how this whole creation thing is going to work. I have put this all in perfect harmony. Job, I am doing intricate little details right now. The seas that are crashed. If the earth tilts 1 degree too close to the sun, you will die right now. If it tilts a degree away from the sun, you will die because of freezing. Job, I've got this whole world figured out. You can trust my wisdom. If I can do all of that, and if I can balance out and I can reconcile the dumb bird with speed, and if I can reconcile the horse that's got a bridle in his mouth, and you say, that's not fair, the horse is now bound, God will say, yeah, but that horse is not fearful of war. I've balanced it out, Job. I've got a whole system that works, and my eyes are on every intricate little detail, even you. It's funny that God would say, who can provide food for the ravens? And then Jesus would say, consider the ravens, how they don't gather up food. Are you not more fed than they? God speaks to him again, this final rebuke. Job, would you discredit my justice? Would you condemn me to justify yourself? You think you're better than I am at this? And here again, you've got to ponder these words. The final 2 things that God says to Job. He tells him of a great beast called the behemoth, whose tail was as large as a cedar. His bones are like bronze, and his power was in his belly. And then he goes from that and he talks about the Leviathan of the deep. He said his scales were so strong that the spears couldn't pierce them. And the scales on his back were the size of shields. And when he breathes, fire comes forth from his mouth. And then God's done speaking, and you're left wondering, what? Why did God tell me about these 2 terrifying animals? In that description of those 2 animals, God says they're beautiful pets here in heaven. Why would God tell us that? Because what God is wanting us to wrestle with is we would look at how many's terrified of alligators like me? I am terrified of alligators. And I can look at that and be like, God, why did you let this dinosaur live? Like this thing he can destroy us in a moment, and it's terrifying. Why is this thing even on earth? And God would look at it and say, it's beautiful in heaven. Don't call something destructive terrible. equally so. Don't call this season I've allowed terrible. It's all beautiful from heaven's point of view. Job, this season that you've just come out of, you would say, what's the point of this? Why would you allow this? God was making Job sit and ponder. Why are these animals here? They can wipe us off the planet. What purpose do they serve? Who told you you were the preeminent one, Job, that animal doesn't deserve to be here? Who are you to think that you are superior, that this animal, though it's destructive and can annihilate you, who are you to say that it shouldn't be here? It's beautiful. I love it. It's beautiful from heaven. Equally so, Job, ask the same question about the season that you've just come through. Who are you to say that you're preeminent and shouldn't have gone through all that pain? Who are you to say, why would this happen to me? Why wouldn't it happen? It's all beautiful. In fact, Ecclesiastes says, all things are beautiful in their time. Who's going to take the time, though, and wait and see? We won't see its beauty if we become a cynic. And we'll never know the reason for the beast if we always stay in Proverbs. And so God is waiting on wise people like you to just trust Him that He's got this in control, that whatever season you find yourself in, be content. That's the good life because it leads to peace. So even after all of that, Job never finds out why. So what does Job get? It would seem that in God's infinite wisdom, He knew the answers wouldn't satisfy Job. I'll choose instead to show Him my glory. And Job stops and he says, God, I've said enough. I want to put my hand over my mouth and I'll be silent. The God he was mad about being silent, after he sees and hears God, he becomes like the God he was mad at. He was transformed into the image of the Father from glory to glory. I will now be like you. I see you're in control. He was made humble because he held hands with Lady Wisdom and he walked with Ecclesiastes, and now he's the wise old Job who has something to say to us. Don't get mad at God when the beast shows up. It's all beautiful from heaven's perspective. Don't get mad at Him. He's in control of every intricate little detail. He's answering prayers even though you're not seeing them. Even though He seems silent, He's still responding. I can feel the Holy Ghost moving through this room right now. Somebody's getting revelation of why, what for, and how. But that story doesn't end there. All of a sudden, we see that Job gets double back what he lost. And here again, if we're fools, we'll look and say, look, he paid off the debt of suffering, Brother Breyer. Now he's getting returned everything that he lost. Wait a minute, pause. He didn't do anything to receive the judgment. What makes you think he has done anything to deserve the gain? God looked down and in His wisdom and looking throughout everything, He said, I'm going to give my son a gift, even though he doesn't deserve it. You know why all this is important? Because we're going to end on Jesus, who said that one wiser than Solomon is among you, who quotes from Job a ton. And if we don't understand the book of Job, we'll never understand the suffering servant Jesus. What good is this Jesus? What good is Him going to a cross? The gift that none of us deserved at the end. Aren't you glad we have a book of Job that helps us understand the wisdom of the cross? Because if we don't have Job, Paul said the cross is foolishness to those that are perishing, but it is wisdom to those who believe. Isn't this beautiful? This is the good life, that even through pain, the Christians are different, because we can look back and we can say, unlike anybody else on this planet, they perish with no hope. But you and I, when we go through problems, they look at us and they say, how are you still thriving? I know for some reason, I don't know how, He hasn't given me an answer, and I don't need one because I've seen His glory. But I know that all things work together for good. And I believe that He is in control of all of this, and somehow it's working. And even if I never know why, here's what I'll get according to the book of James. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. Job was perceived in the future as one who is steadfast. Let it be said of the 21st century church that whatever we go through, whatever political climate, whatever, we're not living in a postmodern world anymore. We are a post-Christian society right now. And let it be said of the Christians that we don't cry, we don't complain, when we don't get our way, we don't fall apart at the seams. We just take a step back and we are made more humble by the season we've been through. And we lift up our hands and we say, God, I am a pile of ashes on the floor, and I see that that was the point. I also see that through this season you have revealed my own arrogance. I address that, and now I will be silent and I'll lift up my hands because I've seen your glory. In fact, right now, can we just stand and can we lift up our hands? Whatever season you're in. If you're in Proverbs, we as the body rejoice with you. I'm so thankful God's blessing you right now. Absorb. I'm personally living through Proverbs right now, my wife and I, and we are so thankful for it. We've been through Ecclesiastes, and I just want to be the wise old man sitting in the room silent. But if you're in Ecclesiastes right now, don't get cynical. Don't walk away. Don't get mad at God. Go and ask Him the questions like Job did. There, you can go ask Him questions. He's not intimidated by your questions. But when you go into prayer, know He's working all these little intricate details out. So would you lift your hands and just, can you just say the words, God, I trust you. I don't even need an answer. God, your glory would be better than an answer. God, I see that you've got all this weighed out. I'm not going to call this beast, I'm not going to call this pain terrible or fearful. It's beautiful from the eyes of heaven. So God, help me to see from heaven's point of view. God, I may not see why, I may not understand it all, but God, I can trust that you're working it together, and whatever gift you choose to give. God, I am fully aware that I did nothing to earn it. God, I didn't do anything to deserve all this. You are the Lord above all. God, you gave us the gift by becoming the suffering servant, and that's what I'll rejoice in. Thank you for the gift of salvation. God, in that I will boast. In that is my salvation. In that is my hope, that however this whole thing shakes out, God, you're in control. God, it doesn't matter who becomes president. It doesn't matter how the society turns out. You're still working all this out, God. You're the one who lays out the measurements of the sea. You're the one who stores away meteors for the judgment and for days of war. You're the one who stores away the snow for its season. You're the one who holds back the rain and tips it over when we need it. God, you have all of that in control. I take my hands off of the wheel and I trust you with what you're doing. Have your way. And in this we pray, nevertheless, not my will, thy will be done. Do what you do, God. You know what you're doing. I don't. I see that clearer, so I trust you. In this grand scheme of things, I see you know exactly what you're doing, and you are wise, and you are just, even when I can't perceive it. I thank you, God. I thank you, God. In the next lesson, we're going to look at how we can do this. It's through the man Jesus. He is the better Job. He is the better Solomon. All of these will always point to the man Jesus. And we're going to see in the final lesson how Jesus he's going to live out everything. He's wisdom. He is Ecclesiastes. He is Job. He is Solomon, but better than all of them. And we're going to see that all of this, every single time, doesn't point to me or you. It points to the man Jesus. Amen. Y'all are dismissed. I love y'all. Thank y'all for being the amazing people you are. See you next Wednesday for Wednesday worship.